So hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our Cash for College Fafsa 101 webinar. My name is May Whiting, and I am the Data and Research Manager at Alabama Possible. We're really excited to have you here today, especially as we approach the new Fafsa cycle that starts this Saturday, October 1st. As always, we like to recognize and thank our sponsors for supporting the work of Alabama Goes to College and making this training opportunity possible. We work with several partners who are really integral in all of this work that we do, so thank you so much to them. Now, a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Please keep your microphones on mute at all times to avoid any feedback during the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/AlabamaPossible. And then today, throughout the webinar, you can submit questions using our chat feature. When you're submitting those questions, please always select the everyone option when typing it in. That way, everyone is able to see your question and we can eliminate the number of duplicate questions that we are asked. So we'll be collecting those questions throughout the webinar, and we are going to attempt to answer them at the end of today's session, but we are pretty limited on time. So anything that we don't get to verbally during the webinar, we will absolutely address both one-on-one and through a shared Google Doc that will have answers to all of your questions. And we'll distribute that Google Doc to everyone who registered today. Now, really important to know, we have poll questions throughout the webinar. These are designed to get your real-time feedback, and we would love if everyone would participate in these. But it's especially important for high school educators to participate in all of the poll questions at the end of the presentation so that you are eligible to receive your professional development credit. So again, high school educators should stay all the way to the end of this webinar in order to complete the required poll questions. And just a heads up, this webinar will be 1.5 hours. So if y'all post on social media, we really encourage you to tag us at AL Goes to College. We absolutely love seeing the work that you're doing with your high school seniors. And we especially encourage you to use the hashtags #PellYes, #Fafsa, and #CashForCollege whenever you're posting about financial aid topics. So like I mentioned at the beginning, high schools still are able to sign up for the Alabama Goes to College campaign. You can do so at alabamapossible.org/register2022-23. And there are only a few days left to register and still be eligible for our Cash for College monetary grant awards. And again, we'll talk more about those awards at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to briefly describe the Alabama Goes to College campaign for those of you who might be new to this work. So this is a statewide campaign that works to ensure that every student can plan for, pursue, and complete valuable post-secondary credentials. And there are 3 components to the campaign. We really focus on promoting completion of the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA, through our Cash for College component. And then we also focus on supporting the college application process through the Alabama College Application Campaign. And then lastly, we celebrate high school seniors and their next steps through the College and Career Decision Day. And so today we're really just going to be focusing on Cash for College. We're going to talk a lot about the financial aid process. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to learn what the FAFSA is, why students and families should complete it, what the different types of financial aid are, what steps are included in completing the application and in receiving aid, and then how can you promote FAFSA completion, and what resources are available to you for you to further assist students. So again, this will be about an hour and a half. If you can't stay until the end, we will provide a recording of the webinar as well as these presentation slides. So you'll have all of the links available. But we are going to start off with a poll question. So our first poll question is just to learn how comfortable you are with the Fafsa. I know there's probably all different levels of comfortability. So I'm going to launch that poll now, and if you could respond. So it looks like the majority of folks are indicating that they feel somewhat comfortable with the FAFSA. That was our most common answer. So thank y'all for responding. All right, so we're just going to start off with some FAFSA fast facts. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid, and it gives students access to the largest source of financial aid for certificates or degrees, whether at 2-year or 4-year programs. And that application is used to determine a student's eligibility for grants, scholarships, work-study jobs, and loans. And we really like to emphasize free aid like the Pell Grant, which can be used towards education after high school, whether technical or academic programs. And the Pell Grant is free aid or gift aid, which means it does not have to be paid back. And the great thing is the majority of students in Alabama are eligible for a full or partial Pell Grant. So that includes most high school seniors in Alabama. The current maximum award is $6,895 per year, and that typically increases every single year. But the reason that that maximum Pell Grant amount is really significant for our state is because the average cost of tuition and fees per year at a 2-year college in Alabama is around $5,048. So that grant award can cover all of tuition and fees. And we know that completing the FAFSA strongly correlates with positive post-secondary outcomes, including increases in college enrollment and attainment. And completion is also associated with narrowing the enrollment gap across socioeconomic status. Now, 92% of students who complete the FAFSA enroll in post-secondary education the following fall. So a really good predictor of enrollment. So throughout today's webinar, I'm going to highlight a few resources that you're able to download from our Educators Toolkit, and you can use these to promote FAFSA completion. So here we have a flyer, gives a quick overview of the FAFSA, and it also really underscores the FAFSA's importance. So all of this effort, all of this work that we know y'all are doing really matters because as of 2021, only 45.7% of the Alabama workforce had a high value credential beyond a high school diploma. And in order to fill our workforce needs, our state needs to add more than 500,000 highly skilled workers with valuable credentials by 2025. So we're just a few years away from that. And then we know that less than half of the class of 2021 had completed a FAFSA by the end of May 2021. That means that these students forfeited millions of dollars of free federal aid that was available to support their post-secondary pursuits. And this is part of the reason that FAFSA completion became part of the high school graduation checklist. So the class of 2022 was the first senior class to be required to either complete a FAFSA or complete an opt-out waiver. And as you can see here, we saw significant improvement in FAFSA completion last year. So for the class of 2022, Alabama is currently ranked second in the nation in year-over-year percentage change. So on the left, you see that Alabama's year-over-year increase, that orange line, is much higher than the national year-over-year change, which is that blue line. And then on the right, you can see our overall completion rate in Alabama is again higher than the national completion rate. And we are currently ranked 9th in the nation in completion. So y'all did a phenomenal job with the class of 2022, and that's what we're hoping for with the class of 2023. You can see here that we saw greater positive year-over-year increases in FAFSA completion for schools that have higher concentrations of low-income students and higher concentrations of students of color. And then we also saw greater positive year-over-year increases for towns and rural geographies. So all of this is really good news for closing some of the equity gaps that are constantly present in post-secondary education. And this is just giving us a look at the state as a whole, but we do hope to keep up this momentum again for the class of 2023. So just to quickly recap, the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. It helps determine eligibility for all kinds of financial aid, and it can be completed at fafsa.gov beginning October 1st. One quick note is that the My Student Aid app has been retired. So if you are used to using that platform with your students, it's important to know it's no longer available. One thing we like to remind folks is that students will continue to complete the FAFSA every single year that they're in a post-secondary program. So every October 1st, they should be thinking about completing their application again. So now we're going to look at how aid is calculated, and it's calculated through the following formula. So we start with cost of attendance, and this is determined by the actual college or institution. It includes the total cost of things like tuition, books, and room and board for the entire year. From that, we subtract expected family contribution, or EFC, which takes into account things like family income, assets, benefits, family size, and the number of family members attending college. And EFC is a little bit confusing. It's not actually the amount of money that the family will have to pay for college, but it is just an index used to kind of understand what the family might be able to contribute. Now, when we subtract the EFC from the cost of attendance, you're determining the student's financial need and how much need-based aid they'll qualify for. So this is our current aid calculation, but I want to note that this year's FAFSA is indeed the last FAFSA that will be using the EFC. So next year's FAFSA cycle will start FAFSA simplification, and with FAFSA simplification, EFC is going to be replaced by an entirely new index. So definitely stay tuned for next year. We'll be kind of relearning the FAFSA process together, and we will definitely provide trainings around that. So very quickly, we'll look at the types of financial aid. Want to point out that oftentimes when people are thinking of the FAFSA, they're mostly associating it with federal aid, like federal loans, but the FAFSA really opens up opportunities to many other kinds of aid, including free aid that doesn't have to be paid back. So we have grants, which are gift aid, like the Pell Grant, scholarships, which are also gift aid and can be awarded for a number of things like academics, athletics, or volunteer work. We have work study, which provides part-time jobs. These are often on campus, and they help students earn money to cover part of the cost of college. And then we have loans that are borrowed money that must be paid back with interest. So again, it's important to stress to your students that the FAFSA is required to determine eligibility even for non-federal grants and scholarships. So examples of that would be grants directly from the college, or even scholarships that come from a private organization or foundation. Many of those will ask for the FAFSA's the student's FAFSA information to determine eligibility. So while the FAFSA is definitely more than just federal aid, these are some types of specific federal aid awards that students might be eligible for. We'll send out the slides so that you have all of these links, but there are grants that are based on financial need, on family circumstances, or on career aspirations and commitment. And then there are also work-study jobs for students with financial need. And then we have many different types of loans. So it's important for the student to be aware of the loan's terms and implications. And then lastly, we have other types of federal aid that depend on your circumstances, like whether you're studying internationally or part of a military family. Now, federal student aid can be used towards expenses such as tuition and fees, books and supplies, transportation, childcare for dependents, as well as room and board. And a big part of the push for FAFSA completion is making sure that we're getting out key messages to students. So we're always trying to correct misinformation and let students know that the FAFSA is completely free to complete. If they're ever being asked for money, then they're probably on a site that's trying to scam them. So make sure that they're going directly to fafsa.gov. The FAFSA is for technical or professional certificates, as well as academic degrees. Like we mentioned, students may be eligible for up to $6,895 per year in Pell Grants. And again, many non-federal grants and scholarships do require FAFSA completion. We really stress early completion beginning October 1st. That's important for students to be able to do all of the follow-up tasks that come after the FAFSA. And then we want students to be aware of scholarship and FAFSA priority deadlines at every college where they're applying. We know it's really important to reinforce these messages to parents and caregivers. So letting them know that the FAFSA is safe and secure using fafsa.gov. That information that they provide is only used to determine a student's eligibility for financial aid and absolutely nothing else. And then their student really needs their assistance in getting all the key information in order to complete the application. So making them aware of the documents they must gather and then having them complete it sooner rather than later so that they have the best chance for receiving multiple types of aid. And then this is a really big one. Even if students think their family does not qualify for federal aid, it's so important that they still have a FAFSA on file just in case. Their financial circumstances certainly might change, but also they should have a FAFSA on file for all the reasons we mentioned earlier. Again, the FAFSA is not just used to determine federal aid, it's also used to determine eligibility for scholarships and grants often awarded by the college. So students with all levels of income should complete a FAFSA, and we really want that ingrained in the culture of every high school in Alabama, that regardless of zip code or neighborhood, every student completes a FAFSA. So to assist with messaging, we have a resource in our educators toolkit. So here we have our student and families guide. Within that, there's a page that has a lot of the key messages we just shared. It's so important to correct misinformation that we hear early on and spread the word about what the FAFSA is actually for. We also have in our toolkit an email template, so you can use these and customize them in whatever way you need for your audience. So now we're going to move on to actual eligibility requirements for the FAFSA, starting off with student eligibility. So to be eligible to accept federal financial aid, students must be a US citizen, US national, or eligible non-citizen. And we'll talk more about that on the next slide. They must have a valid Social Security number with some exceptions. And then they have to have a high school diploma or a general educational development certificate or GED. They also can complete high school through an approved homeschool program, or through an eligible career pathway program. Then they must also be enrolled and accepted as a regular student in an eligible degree or certificate program. Within that program, so in the college, they'll have to maintain satisfactory academic progress, and that will actually be defined by the college. So the college will set a standard for what is deemed satisfactory, and the student will need to meet that criteria in order to remain eligible for aid. And then lastly, the student will have to sign certifying statements on the FAFSA. And those are basically just saying that the student is not default on a federal loan, that they do not owe money on a federal student grant, and then that they're only going to use their aid for educational purposes. Now, like we mentioned, there are some requirements related to citizenship. So if a student is not a US citizen or US national, they must be able to provide other documentation. So the first being a green card indicating that they are a permanent resident. Next being arrival departure record. This is usually for refugees, asylees. The next is a T visa or a parent with a T1 visa. This is for victims of human trafficking. The next is showing proof of battered immigrant status. These are for victims of abuse. And then the next is for citizens of the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, or the Republic of Palau. So with this last bullet point I just covered, some of these folks are only eligible for certain types of federal aid. So if you ever have a question around that, feel free to reach out to us. But important to mention that even if an immigrant student does not have one of these records, they might still be able to complete the FAFSA as a record of family need. So even if they're not eligible for federal aid, they might still complete the FAFSA to determine eligibility for state or private aid. So along the lines of citizenship and documentation status, if a student is undocumented, or if they have been granted Daca or deferred action for childhood arrivals, unfortunately, they are not eligible for federal aid. These folks, however, Daca students in particular, might have a social security number, and so they might be able to complete the FAFSA just to determine their eligibility for state and institutional aid. And we have a note down here that the current administration has proposed expanding federal aid eligibility to Daca recipients. So these are folks who fall under the immigration policy that allows individuals who were brought to the US as a child to receive a renewable period of deferred action where they're basically not able to be deported and they do become eligible for work permits in the US. So there are also some terms for schools to be eligible to receive federal aid. I'm not going to go over them, but it's important to note that the types of aid that are available to students will very much depend on the institution they're attending. So it's important to research the colleges and contact the college wherever a student's applying just to see what type of aid is actually available. So we are going to jump right on into the actual FAFSA completion process, and we're going to highlight some of the updates and changes relevant to this FAFSA cycle. So in terms of which FAFSA cycle to use, there's often a lot of confusion around this, but the FAFSA application is named after the year that the aid is awarded. So the 2023-2024 FAFSA is used to apply for financial aid for fall semester 2023 through summer semester 2024. So most current high school seniors will be using this application to apply for aid for their first year of post-secondary education. But we want to note that in some instances, if a high school senior begins college directly after their high school graduation, so they start summer of 2023, they might need to complete the 2022-23 FAFSA. And that's because it depends on which college you're attending, how they designate the summer semesters. Some colleges will have students complete the previous year's FAFSA for the summer, and some colleges will have students complete the next year's FAFSA for the summer. So just important to reach out to the college's financial aid office if a student is considering taking summer courses. So here are all of the steps for applying for and receiving aid. Steps 1 and 2, so gathering documents and then creating FSA IDs. These can be done in either order, and then they can definitely be done in advance of October 1st. So we'll go over each of these steps individually now. So step 1 is gathering documents. It can save a whole lot of time and ensure accuracy if students and their families have the necessary paperwork in advance. So what they'll need is the social security number of the student, the alien registration number of the student if they're not a US citizen, the dates of birth for the student and the parent if the student is a dependent for FAFSA purposes. And we'll talk a lot about dependency in the coming slides. Here we have parents in quotation marks because we're referring to a parent as defined by federal student aid. So this has a very specific definition that we'll cover. Then we have the parent's social security number if the student is a dependent. We have prior year tax returns. So this upcoming FAFSA cycle will require 2021 tax returns. After that, we have records of untaxed income like child support received and veterans non-education benefits. They'll also need to report any benefits that are being received like Medicaid, SSI, SNAP, and TANF. And lastly, they'll provide information on cash on hand, savings and checking account balances, investments, and any real estate assets not including the home. So we frequently hear from y'all that it's fairly difficult to get parents to provide this information. And that's why we encourage starting the messaging as early as possible so that families have time to prepare and collect all of these documents. And one really great tip that we heard from an educator in the past was that every tax season, she would send out a mass text to all of her families. So they would currently be high school juniors at the time. She would text all the families of her high school juniors and say, hey, you're filing your taxes. Keep those records on hand because you'll need them when your high school senior completes the FAFSA next fall. So that's something that we heard and we thought it was such a great idea. So we thought we'd pass it along. So step 2, we have the FSA ID. Again, this can be done before October 1st, and you can do it at fafsa.gov. So the FSA ID is essentially a username and password for the Federal Student Aid website. And lots of y'all do a great job introducing this early to students so that they have everything ready when it comes to completing the FAFSA their senior year. But the reason we encourage people to do this in advance is because it can sometimes take 3 days or so to process the FSA ID with the Social Security Administration. So you never really want to have a student scheduled to start their FAFSA if they haven't already completed the FSA ID creation process. You want to give it a little bit of a time window to actually get verified. And this ID will also serve as an electronic signature when the student is submitting their FAFSA towards the end of the process. For students who are dependents for the purposes of FAFSA, they will have to create their own FSA ID, and then a parent will also have to create an FSA ID as well. Now, if a student is a dependent, but their parent doesn't have a social security number. Unfortunately, their parent won't be able to create an FSA ID, but they will still be able to complete the FAFSA. Essentially, what they'll have to do is print out the FAFSA, sign it, and mail it in order to do the submission process. But parents without social security numbers will not be able to create an FSA ID. One important tip, and something that we see creating a lot of trouble every year, is that the students and their parents need to use totally separate email addresses and separate phone numbers for their individual FSA IDs. So a parent should only use their personal email address for their account, and a student should only use their personal email address for their account. And we do encourage using personal email addresses rather than school or work email addresses, because this is something they're going to want to keep up with for the rest of their life, and they don't want the email address dependent upon the school they attend or where they're employed. So we have in our toolkit an FSA ID worksheet, kind of guides you through the process of creating this credential. And then we have new advice about an option that we think students should not select. So I'm going to show you this on the next slide. So we really recommend that students not start their FAFSA by inputting their information with this personal identifier option. So here you see that they can either log in with an FSA ID they've already created, or they can go ahead and create one. But there's this new option to use personal identifiers, and this causes a lot of headaches for a few reasons. Essentially, it's kind of acting as a shortcut for students to be able to access the FAFSA. But what it then does is allows students to complete the application without their FSA ID. And when they get to the end of the application, they're going to have to go all the way back and create an FSA ID. So it's a little bit misleading. We saw several students last year use the personal identifiers option, thinking that they had created an FSA ID. And then when they went to submit their FAFSA, they were delayed because they then had to go back and actually create an FSA ID. So I highly recommend that students not do this third option that you see on the screen, that instead they go ahead and create their FSA ID, get that out of the way, don't have to worry about it towards the end of submission. So let's talk about the actual application. It, of course, is comprised of several different sections, which you see at the banner along the top. And one way to get familiar with all of these different sections is to use the FAFSA demo system. So that is linked on this slide, and it allows you to access the 2023-24 FAFSA application with almost all of the features of the actual FAFSA, the only difference being that no data is actually being processed. So we really recommend this tool for those of you who'd like to get comfortable before you're assisting students one-on-one. So there are a few key changes this year with the actual application. One is that eligibility for federal aid is not tied to drug convictions or male students registering for the selective service system. So these questions have been completely removed from the FAFSA starting this year. Another update is that a demographic survey has been added. So before the student signs the FAFSA, they will have to complete this survey. And if they don't want to provide any demographic information, they will have an option to decline to answer. So I just want to make y'all aware of that, since it'll be something new that everyone's seeing for the first time. So when we actually get into the components of the application, we'll start off with student demographics. And a big part of it is ensuring the student's name that they're putting on their application exactly matches the name that is on their social security card. There is a section that asks for the student's driver's license information. This is an optional question, but it is helpful for verifying the student's identity. So if they have it we recommend adding it, but again, it is optional. Another part of student demographics is a question that asks if the student's interested in being considered for work study. And we always recommend that students put yes. It's not committing them to work study, but it is giving them the option to be considered for it. And then they can later decline should they not want to work part-time in a work study job. But we definitely want to leave that option open to students. Students will have an opportunity to make their school selection. So these are the colleges that will actually be receiving their FAFSA information. And so students will indicate where they want all this information to be sent. They must put at least one college, and we really encourage students to put at least one local college or university. In Alabama, you actually don't need to list a state school first in order to determine state aid eligibility. In some states, that is the case, but in Alabama, you can list schools in whatever order you want. And then students can add up to 10 schools on the initial application. Once they've submitted their FAFSA, the student can log in and add additional schools. We've heard students applying to sometimes 20 colleges, so we know that they might have to log back in and add more schools afterwards. So we're moving on to dependency status, and the FAFSA will walk students through a series of questions to determine if the student is a dependent student or an independent student. And this will essentially determine whether or not the student has to provide parent info on the FAFSA. Now, dependency is a common cause of confusion for folks. So we've linked a few resources in both English and Spanish that will answer most of your questions, but we'll also go through those resources in our slides today. So again, a student's going to have to determine if they're considered a dependent or an independent student, and that's how they'll know whether they need to report parent information. So we'll use the Federal Student Aid's Dependency Questionnaire to make this determination. And if a student answers yes to any of the questions, so even just one, then they will be considered an independent student who does not have to provide parent info. Now, one thing that they might have to do is submit additional documentation to verify their status as an independent student. And that's simply because it's really uncommon for students to actually be independent. Now, if a student answers no to every single question, then they are considered dependent and they do have to provide parent info. So here's an example of all the questions that they're asked. This is the questionnaire from last year. It's not yet updated by Federal Student Aid, but as soon as it is, we will make sure to put that in our educator toolkit. So essentially, the application will go through each of these questions almost one by one, but they're presented here on a one-pager so that you can see them all and get an idea of whether or not the student will need to provide parent info. So again, if you go through each of these and you answer yes to even just one question, the student's independent. But if you answer no to all of them, then the student is dependent. And then a student's dependency status, again, will help us know if they need to report any parent info. So for independent students, they're only going to report their own information. And then for dependent students, they're going to report their own information plus their parents' information. And so now we're going to talk about parent determination. So we have a flow chart that will assist us in making that determination, because the way that Federal Student Aid defines parent is a little bit different from how we think of it. And there are some kind of underlying assumptions to the entire financial aid process, which we know is not necessarily the most student-centered approach to assessing financial need. So I just want to kind of couch all of this in the idea that the federal student aid program, it is kind of based on the concept that it is primarily the students and the students' families' responsibility to pay for post-secondary education. And in many ways, the FAFSA assumes that the student has the support of the parent. So the parent's information has to be assessed alongside the student's information in order to get this complete picture of the family's financial strength. And it doesn't necessarily mean that parents are required to pay or support any of their students' post-secondary education, but it is kind of operating under the assumption that the parents will be supporting their education, which is a bit problematic. But the reason it does this is so that it's looking at everyone in a consistent manner. But we know it causes a lot of issues for y'all, especially when you have students who have living circumstances that are not just parent and student. They might be living with other caregivers who aren't their parent. But we will look at how parents are determined for the FAFSA. So we have this flow chart, and we'll start out right here with the first question: are your parents married to each other? If yes, report information for both parents on the FAFSA. If no, it will ask, do your parents live together? So if yes, report information for both parents on the FAFSA, even if they were never married, are divorced, or are separated. Now, if they don't live together, the FAFSA will ask, did you live with one parent more than the other over the past 12 months? If yes, then you want to report the information for the parent you lived with more. If you lived with both parents equally, so you didn't live with one more than the other, then you're going to report information for the parent who provided more financial support over the past 12 months, or in the last year that you actually received support. So it's first asking who you lived with more, and if you lived with your parents the same amount of time, then it's asking who provided more financial support. And when you answer that question, you'll report that person's information plus whoever they remarried if they did get remarried. So you're either reporting just that parent's information or that parent and your step parent's information. Now, a really key part of this is that the following people are not ever considered your parent for the purposes of the FAFSA unless they have legally adopted you. So widowed step parent, grandparents, foster parents, legal guardians, older brothers or sisters, aunts or uncles. None of these people, even if the student is living with them, are considered a parent for FAFSA purposes unless they have legally adopted the student. So again, we're always going to use these questions to determine which parent's information to report. So you might be asking, what if the student doesn't live with their parents, or what if the student doesn't have contact with their parents? So a dependent student can submit the FAFSA without parent information if any of the following applies. 1, the parents are incarcerated. 2, the student's left home due to an abusive family environment. 3, they do not know where their parents are and they're unable to contact them, and the student's not been adopted. And then 4, they're older than 21, but not yet 24, are unaccompanied, and are either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. So if any of these situations apply, then the student has special circumstances, which means the student doesn't have to submit parent information, but their application will not be fully processed until they take the following actions. So they have to immediately contact the financial aid office, gather any required evidence or documentation of their situation. And then after that, they'll receive a financial aid package based on the determination of the school. but there will be an option on the FAFSA for a student to select, I do have special circumstance. There are some other circumstances you might encounter, and these are not considered special circumstances, but this will be how you address them. So one is the student has contact with the parent, but the parent refuses to provide information. In that case, the student may submit the FAFSA without parent information. However, they won't be able to get any federal student aid other than an unsubsidized loan. And even then, that is not guaranteed. So the decision will ultimately be up to the financial aid office at whatever school they plan to attend. But it is really important for any dependent who doesn't provide parent information to then follow up with the financial aid office of the school immediately after they submit their FAFSA. Another circumstance you might encounter is that a student has parents who are undocumented and don't have a social security number. While a parent's citizenship status does not affect a student's eligibility for financial aid, it does impact how the student completes their FAFSA. So even though the FAFSA isn't going to ask about the parent's citizenship status, it will ask for things like a social security number. So if that parent doesn't have a social security number, they will enter all zeros onto the FAFSA. And it's really important that here in the social security number field, parents do not put their ITIN number or their individual taxpayer identification number, which is totally different from a social security number. And it's often what undocumented folks will have to be able to file federal income tax, but you don't want to use that ITIN in place of the social security number. So instead, you'll enter all zeros. And because that parent won't be able to create an FSA ID, they'll need to print, sign, and then mail the signature page in order to finish submitting the FAFSA. Now, once we figured out which parent to report, then we're going to start entering in their parent demographics. So if the student is a dependent, then we'll include the parent's marital status and the month and year that they were married, remarried, separated, divorced, or widowed. We'll also include the number of dependents of the parent, as well as the number of college students in the parent's household. Then we'll move on to the financial section, and we'll indicate the type of tax return filed, if any, as well as the tax filing status. One thing to make all of our lives a lot easier is the IRS data retrieval tool. So in order to transfer tax information, families can utilize this tool, which allows them to securely and accurately transfer all of the tax information into the FAFSA. To be able to do that transfer process, you have to enter in the correct and the exact address information that is actually on the tax return. So if families have brought in their tax return, that is super helpful. They can look at the address exactly as seen on their return, type it into this retrieval tool, and it'll pull through all of their tax information. If a family is unable to use the DRT, then they'll have to put in all that tax information manually. And there are a few groups of people who are unable to use the DRT. Those include the folks you see on the screen. So those who are married and filed as married filing separately, those who are married and filed as head of household, or those who filed a Puerto Rican or foreign tax return. All of these folks are not eligible to use the data retrieval tool, and they'll need to enter in their tax information manually. Now, we've already talked about it, but the FAFSA uses prior year tax information. So we're referring to tax info from 2 years ago. So if we're talking about the 2023-24 FAFSA, then families will use their 2021 tax return. So that will be the return that they filed this most recent tax season. And lots of families have concerns about providing their financial information, so it's important to emphasize that a family's income info is only used to determine need-based aid that the student is eligible to receive. Other than tax information, families also have to provide benefit info. So that includes things like Medicaid or supplemental security income, supplemental nutrition assistance program benefits, free or reduced price school lunch benefits, temporary assistance for needy families, and then the special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children. So that benefit information will be reported, and then untaxed income and asset information will also be reported. These include things like child support received, veterans non-education benefits, workers' compensation, and disability benefits. And then there's also a section to report asset information, like we mentioned earlier, but I do want to point out that not everyone will have to report this information. The FAFSA essentially has built-in skip logic. So if the FAFSA offers for the family to skip these questions, then the family should feel free to do so. Otherwise, if it is determined that the family needs to report this info, they'll have to report cash on hand, savings and checking, investment, and then real estate assets. Now, the student will also have to report their financial information. So if they filed taxes, the type of return that they filed, and then their tax filing status. And then they'll be asked all the same questions as their parent. So once we've completed each of those individual sections, we'll get to the part where they actually sign and submit the FAFSA. If the student is dependent, like I said, both the child and the parent must sign the FAFSA, and they will use their FSA ID to sign electronically, which is definitely the fastest option. However, if they can't sign electronically, then they can still print the application, sign by hand, and then mail in that signature page. So that will apply to folks who might have undocumented parents. So then what's next after submitting the FAFSA? There's still a lot that happens after submission. So it takes about 3 to 10 business days for the Department of Education to process a FAFSA. Students can check that status immediately online. The student will then receive a student aid report, which is a summary of all the FAFSA data submitted. So it's important for them to review that, make any corrections as needed. And then in addition to that student aid report, the financial aid offices of the colleges where the student might be applying would also reach out if they needed any additional information from the student. So with the student aid report, from the moment the student submits their FAFSA, we encourage them to start checking their email inbox for the SAR, or the student aid report. Now, if a student didn't include a valid email address on their application, then they'll likely get their SAR by mail. So this can take anywhere from 3 days to 3 weeks. Again, they want to check it for accuracy. They also want to check for the expected family contribution, or the EFC, because if that is missing, it might indicate that the FAFSA is incomplete and there's more that the student needs to provide. And then there might be notes that indicate that there's some follow-up the student needs to do, or even that the student has been selected for verification, which we'll talk more about. So again, just encourage students to read that report carefully and take any required action. So here's an example of student aid report, and as you can see, it includes the applicant's expected family contribution in the middle. So after completing the FAFSA, students do have an opportunity to add a school or update their school list, and they make it really easy for the students now, so they can just log back into their FAFSA homepage and say they apply to another college that they weren't originally intending to apply to. They can just go back into their FAFSA, make sure that that college receives all of their financial information. So I mentioned verification. The verification process consists of making corrections and providing additional information, and it is a completely normal process. So the student might find out that they've been selected for verification through their student aid report, or they might be contacted by their college to let them know that there are some additional tasks they'll need to complete. And none of this means that the student is in trouble. It's a very normal process, and how you complete the process will completely vary by college. So if a student gets a notification of verification from a college, then they'll essentially want to follow the exact process that the college has laid out. So I would recommend getting guidance and support directly from that institution, because they'll usually have specific forms for a student to complete. And it's really important to respond to these requests for documentation really quickly to get all of that clarified so that the student can receive their financial aid award. So the financial aid offices of each college are definitely there to help. And the good news, especially this year, is that the Department of Education recognizes that verification can often be a burden for students. It normally will slow down the process. So over the years, the DOE has really reduced the instances and the reasons for verification. So hopefully you're not seeing as many students be selected this year. All right, so we are going to do a quick poll question just to check in, see if everything is making sense. So we're going to ask, which tax return is needed for this upcoming FAFSA cycle? So if you can answer that question on your screen. Awesome. I see most of you are getting this right. Okay, so most of you have put 2021, which is the correct answer. Remember, the FAFSA is always asking for prior year tax information. So if you see that the FAFSA cycle starts with 2023, you think 2 years back, they need 2021 taxes. Okay, the very last step are award letters. So step 7 is receiving and accepting financial aid awards. Each college that accepts a student for admission will send a financial aid award letter. And for the school that the student wants to attend, they must either accept or decline each type of aid. And we recommend accepting in the following order: free money, so scholarships and grants; earned money, so that's work, study, jobs; and then borrowed money, so federal student loans. Now, a few award concerns that might come up. So what if the financial situation of the student or their family changed significantly, either because of financial hardship or maybe even unemployment? So in that case, the student and their family, because they're submitting 2021 tax information that might not totally reflect their current financial situation, the student can proactively communicate their change in financial circumstances immediately to the financial aid office after completing the FAFSA and before receiving an award. So we do encourage students to be proactive in that manner and let them know, hey, I submitted my 2021 taxes as required, but it's not giving you the full picture of my need. Now, if the student then gets their aid award and it still doesn't reflect their actual need, they can actually appeal the award. Colleges are able to use what's called professional judgment to adjust the student's information, which could then impact their grant eligibility. So we've linked a resource here called Swift Student, where you can access these award appeals. I'm going to talk about some common mistakes that we see during the FAFSA process. The first and probably the most common that we see is using the wrong person as the FAFSA parent. So we frequently hear folks listing a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle as the parent, and these folks are never considered a parent unless they have legally adopted the student. We also want to make sure that students are not using an incorrect website. They should be using fafsa.gov, and that's the only place that they should start their application. And then one common mistake is not completing the FAFSA 100%. So they might have gotten all the way through the application, but not actually done the sign and submit section. So that's really important to ensure they've gotten all the way to the end of that process. Another mistake is not starting as soon as the FAFSA is available. So October 1st is here this weekend. We want to get started ASAP so that students are eligible for all types of aid and don't miss out on any aid. Another mistake is putting incorrect information or listing only one college when the student has actually applied for admission at multiple colleges. So we want to make sure that we're going back into the FAFSA and adding any additional schools that should receive our financial info. And then another mistake is not using the data retrieval tool when students and families are actually eligible to do so. That is so important because if a student is eligible to use the tool, then it will be the most accurate way of pulling in that information. Other common mistakes are not reading definitions carefully. So the FAFSA, if you're doing the online application, it has a little button you can click for almost every single question where terms are defined very comprehensively. So I recommend doing that. And then, like I said, not signing the FAFSA, students will get all the way through, think they're complete, but they haven't actually done the signature portion. Or what is also fairly common is that the student signs the FAFSA, but their parent does not sign the FAFSA. So the student's actually done all of their portion, but the parent hasn't done their portion. So we want to make sure for dependent students, they're both doing that. And then another issue is not submitting the FAFSA within 45 days of the start. You want to submit within 45 days just so that the application doesn't get wiped. Another issue is not filing by the deadline for either the actual college the student's applying to or the scholarship program. So you want to make sure we have all those deadlines marked and noted on your calendar so that you get the FAFSA in by that time. And of course, the worst mistake would be waiting until after graduation to complete the FAFSA. We know for our class of 2023, they either need to do the FAFSA or complete an opt-out waiver, but we really hope they're doing the FAFSA while they have all of the wonderful support of their counselors and career coaches. Just really quickly, I want to mention state aid since it's not something we talk about a lot. So families can learn more about state aid opportunities by visiting ake.edu and then going to the students and parents section. Under that, there will be a funding college section. And then there you'll find the Paying for College guidebook. This has all different state aid programs. And oftentimes, in order to be eligible for these, the student will have had to complete the FAFSA. So we are going to get into some strategies for completing. The first one is to use prior year data to set goals and then monitor your progress throughout the year. And we have a few dashboards for that. We will highlight those in just a moment. The best thing you can do is to communicate through multiple channels. So you know exactly what your audience, what your community prefers in terms of communication. So reach them through that channel, and y'all are welcome to use any of the templates that we have available in our toolkit. In all of these communications, you want to convey the benefits of completing the FAFSA early, and you really want to keep students updated on any priority deadlines. So here's the sample announcement that we have. These can be used at events you have on campus, or they can be used for things like the school newsletter. And like I said, we have a couple different platforms for you to monitor and track FAFSA completion. So in terms of monitoring your progress, we have the Cash for College data dashboard. It can be found at alabamapossible.org/dashboard. And this will be updated for the class of 2023 with the first data release for this upcoming cycle. So we will update on a weekly basis from October all the way through June. And again, this is a great way to monitor school-wide data. So you'll see there are a bunch of tabs up at the top. The school detail tab that you see in that left-hand screenshot, it's going to show you your school's current FAFSA completion percentage compared to last year's FAFSA completion percentage. So it lets you compare year to year and then see if you're on track, if your goal is to beat last year's progress or whatever your goal might be. And then you can also see that there's a pie chart that will show you how many applications are missing, complete, or incomplete. And this dashboard essentially exists because not every district in the state of Alabama has access to the AIC portal, which I will go ahead and discuss now. So this is from the Alabama Commission on Higher Education. They have the FAFSA completion portal, and it's a platform which allows you to monitor the progress of your individual students. So once you have login credentials, you can actually see student level FAFSA progress. So for instance, in the screenshot on the left, you can see whether a FAFSA is completed, when the application was submitted, and whether the student has been selected for verification. And then if the student's application isn't fully complete, you can actually see what steps they have left to take. So this tool in particular is absolutely critical for folks to use if they have access. It will allow you to be super intentional about your outreach to students. And if you do not have login credentials, you can contact FAFSA at aic.edu. And I'll have one of the team members put that in the chat. But if you don't have logins to the AIC portal, you can contact FAFSA at aic.edu. Now we are going to have a comprehensive webinar on both of these platforms, so we're just doing the highlights today. But if you have questions, especially about the portal, feel free to reach out to us directly and also consult our new guide that we have available in our toolkit. So this is going to cover frequently asked questions, and it will also advise you how to get your students' PowerSchool information to match their federal student aid information. That match is key in order for the student's info to be pulled into the portal. And then this guide also contains a glossary that defines terms within the portal. So if you don't know what something means, you can consult our glossary. So I am now going to take a moment to turn it over to Jessica Morton, who is our PowerSchool coach. And she is going to provide some information on how to get PowerSchool information updated and entered. So Jessica, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey everyone, I'm Jessica Morton. I am one of the 3 PowerSchool coaches that works for the State Department, and we work under we're aligned with Stacy Royster. Y'all know her and she's in ed tech as well. And we're just trying to kind of get this information out there. Just want to share a few things with you today. I did share that it would be good if you have specific questions or issues, like if you get stumped or something, if you want to email one of us, we usually can kind of jump on and help you real quick if you get stumped. So that's something that is to your benefit. We are this month has been a little crazy busy. Next month we do slow down a little bit, but we do have a lot of site visits next month. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen real quick. Let's see. So, and thinking about where we are with PowerSchool, like I said, I'm one of the 3 coaches. Let me move this out of the way so you guys can see a little bit better. Sorry. Okay, so I mainly do regions 8 through 11. I have 24 years of experience in education. Before this, I was the K-12 English Language Arts Specialist. Before that, I was a principal and a guidance counselor, assistant as a assistant principal. I had a lot of those functions that I helped the guidance counselor with. So just a lot of different things on a principal. So also teacher by trade. But anyway, these are the other two. But again, we all three work together to have that common voice and to empower everyone across the state. And then we have Kendall. She's in the top region, and she has regions 1 through 3. And like I said, Quandria has 4 through 7. So, and moving right along, this is one area that we, I kind of talked about this morning, May, and because I was like, well, if they don't have the permissions, and that's going to be an issue if they can't do certain functions in there. So that's something that you need to see if you can see, and if you can't, then, check on those permissions if you have, because that's one of the major, I guess you would say, pitfalls, is that people don't know what they don't know because they don't have those rights. So so that's important. So if you're on your PowerSchool start screen at the very beginning and you've cleared out all your breadcrumbs, you're going to go over there to that left for setup and system, and then security, and even you can go to school. And if you see on there, you'll be able to see groups or either even profiles, so that you'll be able to see if you have access. Just scroll down and you'll be able to see if you have access for that particular thing or not. So that's been a big question of where to find that information. And I can actually share this with May if you need it, if she needs me to, so that you guys can have it. The other thing we kind of talked about was making sure that the demographics was filled out. I was listening to all this stuff about the FAFSA, and I know that a lot of those things about the parent not signing and all that kind of stuff, but it's really important that these general demographics are filled out to their entirety, so that everything matches up and it is how it should be. So just make sure that you have filled out all of that information and that it is accurate and correct. The other thing we wanted to talk about was this provisional enrollment, and that this is only for within state transfers. So that is only, so it's only available if that child is transferring within state. Okay. So in order to get to that place, you'll see over here to the left, this is that menu. So you're under functions, and that provisional enrollment is right there. So if you don't, some of the errors that you might encounter are going to be this E99 over here. That means that a not withdrawn, transferred out of losing school district, and what that really means. And then also withdrawn, transferred out at losing school district, enter exit date is overlapped. That's been the largest. So the key here is that when thinking about withdrawing a student, you withdraw that student on the day after that they were in class. So today, if today's my last day, I don't withdraw that student today, I withdraw that student tomorrow. So that's really important, because that's been one of the large overlaps of issues that we've seen throughout this. And then remember, when they're transferring into, to make sure that you do check within the state to see if they have been, within the state somewhere else, so that you can see if they have been, released, or what school that they're at. And now I'm running through this pretty fast, but again, I can share this with you guys if you would like it. The waiver, and I will tell you, we talked about this, Quandria and Kendall line. We did talk about the fact that we were kind of looking at what would be the best case scenario. And I don't know how far you guys have gotten into this yet, but honestly, the best thing is to do a group function and to select no waiver, and then go in and do and actually update the ones that do enter the waivers. That is usually the best way to do it. And your other, your choices are district waiver, where the superintendent signs it. You have the parent waiver, where the parent signs it, and then you have the no waiver. So that was the easiest, just to go ahead and do no waiver for all of them, and then actually go back and correct the ones that you have. And I am going to walk you through that in just a second as well. So if I'm in my sandbox, and again, this is a sandbox, so listen, it may not look exact. It's a global sandbox that we use, where no real names and so forth are on there, so we're not exposing any data, FERPA or anything else going on. So I'm going to show you this, and like I said, it may look a little different, but it's the process of how to do it. So I'm going to go into my PowerSchool Labs, into my sandbox, and I want to show you exactly how to get to here. So if you are selecting students to be able to do that whole field, the one I was just talking about, so you're going to select that group of students, like I would select my 12th graders, and I'm going to go right down here to the bottom. Sorry, I know I've got all these things. Right here is what is the group function. I'm going to move this bar up here too. Right here is that group function. So you click here, It's going to pop up all these different things. Sorry, I don't have this hooked to my double screen. And then you're going to scroll down to where it's field. You're going to go down to student field value right here. And that is under functions, okay? And this is group functions on the right down here, this little caret menu. So when you go into group functions, this one is going to pop up. So if you don't know, like the letters, underscore, and all that kind of stuff, it kind of gets a little confusing. So I always search by fields. So when you go to fields here, you got a filter. And what I did was I popped up waiver, okay? So now nothing comes up for this, but because they do not have this code for Alabama. But if you were in your sandbox, it will pop up waiver. There's going to be 2 options. And the one that you're going to choose, I'm going to go back to my screenshot, is this one right here. You're going to choose state Alabama. This code right here is the one that you will choose. And then that was going to be selected for all students. Once you hit submit, it's done for all your students, and that no waiver is, and you'll have the option to choose no waiver. Okay. Again, I'll share this with you. I know that was quick. I will tell you the other thing we talked about, the 3 of us, whenever we kind of discussed a little bit more this morning, and this is one of the things we want to talk about. Make sure that your graduation exit types are in fact correct too, whenever they are leaving, and that they have the right date entered. That's been another issue that we've seen across the state. Here's that one screenshot of the different waivers. Again, choosing no waiver to begin with, unless you've already started the process. And if you have, then you would choose that parent or district. The no-shows, make sure that when you no-show a student, this is another issue that we had, make sure that your no-shows is done on the first day of your school. Whatever day that your school started, that's when your no-show should be from. Okay. A lot of times districts like to wait 10 days, and of course it's been past that now, but to enter those no-shows, and that's fine if you do what your school or district or what have you, entity tells you to do. But for the most, from when you're entering that date, it should be on that very first day. And of course, those no-shows are the ones that you don't know where they go. You don't know where they are at all. Because if not, if you don't clear that data up, then you're going to have dropouts. Those no-shows will turn into dropouts. And I know as a former assistant principal working with counselors, we would have to search. Listen, we went to Facebook, we went to the newspaper trying to find those people where they went. You would be surprised by all the fun places we looked to find all these students, because we did not want any dropouts. I mean, we were diligent in what we had to do. Is there anyone that has any questions?
We can definitely gather questions and then share those with you so that you can email back and forth.
Okay, so here is a contact. This goes straight to our needs assessment. And then this is just like a quick survey of how we did today with providing you with information.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. I know there was a lot to cover in a little amount of time, but I want to encourage all of the educators on today that we will have that future webinar specifically covering the data tracking for FAFSA completion. And we intend to invite our Power School coaches to that so that they'll have a lot more time to cover with you the different things in Power School that will impact how FAFSA completion is showing up in the AIC portal. But just to kind of tie that all in, since we experience some common issues every year, big things that we see are that the student's name is not entered into Power School exactly as their name is shown on their social security card. So that might cause issues in matching student info. We also see that students who've transferred from one school to another haven't had the transfer process fully complete in Power School. So like Jessica mentioned, you want to make sure the student is fully transferred out of their previous school and then fully enrolled in your current school. That's the only way that you can get accurate FAFSA completion information. And then we also want to make sure that withdrawal dates and graduation dates are accurate. You never want to put a graduation date in a withdrawal field, because then you will lose that student from your list in the AIC portal. Okay, so we were talking about the AIC portal last, and I'll just wrap up with a few other strategies that we recommend. Of course, we recommend to collaborate with other teachers in your school building to discuss financial aid, especially during those relevant classes like economics or government. We do have a lesson plan available to support that. And we know as much as possible, having everyone involved in this process is really helpful so that the messaging is consistent and everyone is aligned in this mission. We also recommend partnering with local organizations and especially your local community colleges to host events promoting the FAFSA, whether that's on your campus or within their community space. We encourage you to provide motivating incentives like a community learning day or the opportunity to wear a special graduation cord for any student who's completed the FAFSA. So last year we heard from several educators that if their seniors completed a FAFSA, they gave their student a day off campus, whether that was time to work on college applications, to volunteer, or to work at their part-time job. And then lastly, we of course recommend you register for our professional development webinars and register for our campaigns so that you can receive technical assistance from us. One thing we plan to do this year is we plan to host virtual FAFSA office hours where you can come and you can ask specific questions, especially for those students who might have very complicated FAFSAs. So we will keep you informed of the dates for our office hours. Here is a look at our lesson plan that can be used in the classroom. That's in our educator's toolkit. And then now we want to get to the fun part. With all that we've talked about around FAFSA completion, we want to talk about the awards that we have available. So we have a mid-year recognition opportunity. That's our Best Hustle Award, which is given in December. And schools with at least 10% improvement in early FAFSA completion, so from 2021 to 2022, will receive this award. And we define early FAFSA completion as completion during the months of October and November. So anyone with at least 10% improvement will be recognized. We also have some end of year awards. So we have our MVP award that's given to schools with the highest FAFSA completion percentage. And then our most improved award is given to schools with the greatest year-over-year improvement in FAFSA completion. And we give both our MVP and our most improved awards based on school size. So that way we're comparing schools to schools with similar senior class sizes. And we do have an exciting announcement around that. So we want to let you know that based on your feedback, we have updated our school size categories. And we hope that this makes the competition a little bit more fair for everyone. So our new size categories align with those that the AIC portal uses. So if you're ever on the homepage, that data homepage on the AIC portal, you'll see that they have a section for top achievers, and they categorize these top achievers based on size categories. So we use those to inform our new categories, which we will now have 5 of. So there will be an MVP award and a most improved award for each of our size categories, ranging from extra small to extra large. So we hope that's good news for lots of you. Just want to highlight a few resources to reference. In terms of federal student aid, they are hosting a webinar actually today at 1 p.m. So you're welcome to join that. They'll give updates on this upcoming FAFSA cycle. Of course, we also recommend fafsa.gov. It has just about everything you can think of in terms of resources for the FAFSA. They also have a financial aid toolkit. This is where you can access one-pagers, graphics, even videos. I noticed that the website was down the other day, so I'm not sure if it's back up again, but this is basically a house for all kinds of resources you can share with families. And then the Federal Student Aid Hotline is listed here. It is really good at answering super complicated questions for those students who have quite uncommon situations. So I do recommend the hotline. You might be on hold for a little bit, but it is worth it. Their representatives are generally very good at answering questions. Of course, you also have our toolkit. There is a Cash for College folder within our overall educator toolkit. And then we can't emphasize it enough, but the financial aid offices at your local college are great resources. They're always willing to volunteer for any kind of event you might be hosting. We will be releasing our 2023-2024 FAFSA walkthrough next month in October. That will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. We'll make sure to notify you as soon as it is available. We have a help desk. This is a resource for educators, for students, for family members, pretty much anyone, and we'll definitely answer questions about financial aid. So you can reach us at 334-316-6155. We're available on weekdays during business hours. So feel free to send your students our way through this help desk. So now we'll take a moment for the questions that we received in our chat.
The first one, does the toolkit contain a one-pager that lists the documents needed to complete the FAFSA? If so, where is it located? Thank you.
Our toolkit does not, but we have a federal student aid webpage that we always send out to folks. It's fairly comprehensive, so it's not necessarily one-pager friendly, but we can be sure to link that in our follow-up email. And if you want to use it to create a one-pager, you're welcome to do so.
Okay, next question. If a student is legally emancipated from a parent and that parent has them on 2021 taxes, do they still put dependent?
Let me pull up our slides so that we're all on the same page with this question. But the first thing that I want to note is that when you're determining dependency for the FAFSA, you're never asking yourself about dependency on income taxes. The two are totally different dependency questions. So here are our dependency questions. So the question was about emancipation. So you'll see, has it been decided by a court in your state of legal residence that you are an emancipated minor? So if the student can answer yes to that question, then they will be considered independent for the purposes of the FAFSA and will not have to provide parent information.
The next question, if a student's parent is incarcerated, and I think you answered this, but if a student's parent is incarcerated and has no way of getting the info, what is the procedure?
That is considered a special circumstance. So you can see here that the student will have the option to select, I have a special circumstance, meaning I will not be providing parent information. Now, even so, it's very important that they immediately contact the financial aid office explaining their situation, and they'll likely be reached out to by the financial aid office of all the colleges where they're applying.
Next question, what about if both parents are deceased and the student lives with another relative that have not adopted them?
So that is one of the dependency questions. You'll see it right here. At any time since you turned age 13, were both your parents deceased? So if a student answers yes to that, then they are considered independent, assuming, like you mentioned, that they have not then been legally adopted by anyone else.
So a student who has a legal guardian is independent, even if the guardian has claimed them on taxes?
Yes, so I want to note here with the legal guardianship question, because this can be a bit tricky. So the question asks, has it been decided by a court in your state of legal residence that you are an emancipated minor, or that someone other than your parent or step-parent has legal guardianship of you? So first you want to make sure that the legal guardianship is not with a parent or step-parent. Then you want to make sure that the student's court documentation says guardianship and not custody. So this is frequently confused. It must say legal guardianship, and if so, that student, if they answered yes, is independent for FAFSA purposes. Doesn't matter how they were claimed on taxes.
Is there any language help for filing out the Fafsa for students whose first language isn't English?
I believe that the Federal Student Aid Hotline is available in multiple languages. Now, we provide a few different resources for students in English and Spanish, but certainly not all of our resources are in multiple languages. If there's anything specific that you're looking for, we would be happy to do some research to try to find it. But I do believe that the Federal Student Aid Hotline can be called for other languages spoken.
We are a private school. If we register, will we still be eligible for grant money or assistance?
Yes, every school that registers for our Alabama Goes to College campaign by the October 1st deadline will be eligible to compete for the awards that we went over.
Next, the EFC change to SAI will affect our current juniors, correct?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, a FAFSA simplification was passed and it will impact the 2024-25 FAFSA cycle. That means that the aid calculations, the aid indices, all of this will change during the next application cycle. So it will affect your current juniors. So that is pretty much it, everyone. I want to make sure that you see how to claim your professional development credit. This will be available in the follow-up email, but you'll visit this PowerSchool link and you'll enter course number 255839, section number 453842. You have to go through that process of registration in PowerSchool in order to actually receive your hours. So please make sure to do so. I think the State Department usually has about a 2-day window on that. So after each webinar, if you could get that done fairly quickly, that would be much appreciated. But we are so thankful that you held on this long. Here's how you can stay connected with us. You can contact us at algostocollege@alabamapossible.org. Of course, you can call our help desk number as well. All of our upcoming events will be included on our events webpage, which will be in the follow-up email. So we hope to see you at a future webinar. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.